Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, because I know that we have a very stretched time zone across the world today. We have people joining from pretty much all over. Thank you for coming. My name is Charles Cho. I am the co-founder of Accounting for Impact. Accounting for Impact is a network that fosters engagement to promote research and make better societal impact. I will not say much today because we are a team at Accounting for Impact, and today Julie Bernard, who is one of our team members, is kind of in charge of this event. She put the panel together. She's the idea, so she's going to moderate the event. And I will come at the end to close the event. But pretty much you are in the hands of Julie with the four speakers that she has carefully invited. And so, Julie, over to you so you can maybe introduce your speakers and going with the event. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you everyone for being here. I am conscious that for some of you, we should have provided delivery for coffee, especially Michelle, for whom it is 6 a.m. I am really grateful to have this panel for which we are going to talk about waiving Indigenous knowledge from research to classroom. And I do believe that our panel today has done such a thing in in an exceptional way. So I'm very eager and excited to hear Jim talk, which is a good thing when you invite people, right? The moderator should be the most excited people in the room. So we have Anna Maria, Stephen, Jesse, and Michelle. Three from whom are two are in New Zealand, one in Australia, and one based in Ottawa, but currently in Victoria. And they're all also interrelated into a bigger project, which is the International Academy of Indigenous Knowledge and no, why am I forgetting the acronym of ARMOS? I
Very
know. Yeah, sorry about this.
Oh, no, no, it's difficult. The International Academy of Research in Indigenous Management and
Um,
Organization Studies.
In full disclosure, I am a little bit tired. I am a mother of a very young baby who's been sick for the past 5 days and just managed to go to daycare for the first day today. But that did not mean I had the luxury of sleeping. So I am very sorry. And English is my second language. So I might be confusing French and English words. So this will be an exciting panel for many reasons. So before I put the foot in my mouth a bit too much, I wanted to let our panelists to introduce themselves in their own words and to let them highlight things that they believe that everyone here should know and um, have them the luxury of highlighting some things in their CV or things that they've been doing that they believe is important or critical for them. So I will go in alphabetical order and I will start with Anna Maria to say a few things about yourself quickly before we kick off.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Ana Maria Peredo. Um, I joined you from the unceded lands of the coast and Strait Salish people, where I live and I play and I learn. Thank you, Julie, for organizing this. This is great. So thank you so much. Um, Let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm mestiza from Peru. I have been shaped by both Andean worldviews and academic knowledges. I have worked with indigenous people both in the global north and in the global south. Um, my aim is to center indigenous knowledge in our field and have been a long way to do this. And this is a very special time. Much of my work in community organizing and grassroots organizations have been to challenging the cultural, what I call the cultural captivity of management. So having to free that and show that there is other ways of being and seeing. So that having my work with community-based, with alternative organization, with indigenous organizing, is to the center that Western paradigms is one way to see the world. I have to say that I'm very happy to be here for different reasons. Um, because this is an accounting organization. And this is kind of connecting me with accounting in a very special way because back in the 90s, as a Peruvian anthropologist and a new doctoral students walking in the halls of the business school, I was just felt like I landed on Mars. I was there escaping the Chinese path, the terrible guerrilla movement, being anthropologist that have worked so many years with Aymara and Quechua people. And here I am in the business schools where everything have name, every room have names of oil companies. And I say, this is like Mars. And here the conversations was just to me incredible. So I was asking, I'm doing here, what I'm doing here, until I met Dean New. I don't know if he's in the audience. Many of you know Dean New. He's an accountant, a Marxist accountant. And we start talking about Eduardo Galeano, about the common good, the public interest. Gosh, this changed for me many things. Just meeting this accountant, a professor, at that time he was assistant professor. So, and I was absolutely delighted that I learned that the whole basement of that building was full of Marxist accountants that I can go and chat with them. So I stayed and start weaving. So I'm looking forward to talking about what we are doing, about IRIMOS, about our upcoming book on indigenous knowledges with Steve and Jesse. And I. So looking forward to the conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna. I will pass it on to Jesse.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks also, Charles, for opening us up this morning. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be part of this conversation. So, my background, well, my name is Jesse Piterney. I'm based in Aotearoa, New Zealand. My father is Māori and my mother is Pākehā, New Zealand European. And so my background is kind of a mixture of Māori and Pākehā here in New Zealand. And here we have a kind of interesting bicultural basis in the Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, which was signed in 1840. And New Zealand now is a very multicultural space. And so we have this really interesting history. We also have this history of colonization and a lot of land and resource and cultural loss for Māori, and which has enduring impacts today and continues today. So my background, I have been working in the Wellington School of Business and Government with Steve for the past 7 years or so, and we've got into a lot of really interesting work around economic development. And we did such an interesting project with local Māori communities exploring this idea of developing an economic development strategy. And it became really clear that economic development was one piece of many other things. And people they didn't want just economic development. They didn't want to give up a whole lot of cultural, social, environmental, and political values for economic development alone. And so we started exploring different ways of developing strategy and expressing those and pursuing strategic outcomes with economic development as part of that, but weaving in a whole lot of other cultural values into those processes. So my work, and obviously this aligns really closely with this idea of accounting for impact and taking different perspectives rather than a solely economic one. So my interest is in two things. One is around equity, so like equal outcomes. We still have a whole range of poorer outcomes for Māori in New Zealand. But the other side is probably a more positive one, which is, and I'm trying to kind of figure out what I mean by this, but I think it relates to what Anna Maria talked about in terms of cultural captivity of management and of a lot of our business school topics. There's so much value in different perspectives, and And so for me, there's the equity question, but then the more exciting and interesting question is how do we bring in different perspectives that are grounded in different cultural practices and interests and beliefs um, into what's kind of typically like a dominant set of ideas. Um, how do we bring in different ideas that just make things more fun, more cool, more interesting? And yeah, so those are my two kind of interests currently in this space. And yeah, just really eager to share some of the stuff we've been working on and to talk with all of you about the things that you're interested in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I will pass it on to Michelle.
Well, good morning. Hope everyone can hear me. Let me start also by acknowledging country. I'm joining today from the lands of the Wiradjuri people and Wiradjuri country here on the northern side of the Millewa-Billa, or what's known here in Australia as the Murray River. I live on the borderlands between New South Wales and Victoria, which are the colonial constructs here in Australia. And it's my absolute honour to pay my acknowledgement to elders past and present here. My name's Michelle Evans. I'm a Koori woman from the Hunter Valley, just north of here now where I live and all my family is. And I'm a leadership scholar, Julie. So I come to leadership from a long career in community-based Indigenous arts practice. And I was really interested to come into the Business Academy and to kind of meet the ideas of how we account and how we account for impact when I arrived at the business school as a fresh kind of person who had never been in these places. And the biggest kind of shock to me, having worked in Indigenous community organisations and establishing community-based arts organisations and cultural organisations, was that there were no other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people in these spaces. And it was a really big cultural shock for me. So a lot of the work that I have done over the past 15 years has been about that simple kicking open the door to these elite business institutions and also creating a space in the minds of my colleagues and faculty members and people that I work with to think a little bit differently about the importance and the unique perspectives and characteristics that Indigenous business leaders can bring into the space, because oftentimes it just is seen as very periphery and not that much to offer. And I guess that's been my journey into these spaces too, and what was pushback on of my work. One of the first reviews that I had in an international setting was, why are you bothering talking about this Indigenous stuff with leadership people? Don't bring this to leadership. This isn't leadership, and you have to advocate for Indigenous perspectives. I like the word weaving that you have used that we will talk to today, but in many ways we actually have to do more than that in a more I wouldn't say aggressive, but much more forceful matter. We have to advocate. We have to kick down a door. We have to push into a space. We have to create platforms for Indigenous voices and Indigenous perspectives. I wanted to also just echo Anna Maria's idea of meeting her person in the business schools. And for me, it's also true to find those critical accountants, which I was just, wow, this is really exciting. But to also now think about the use factor of how we apply accounting methods and standards and ideas to thinking about very complexified ideas about theories of change and different approaches there. And that's a little bit of the work that we do at the Dylan Dewar Centre for Indigenous Business Leadership, which I founded in 2021 and is just about to turn 4. And I'm the Director for Indigenous Business Leadership at the University of Melbourne and Melbourne Business School. Now, it's an area that I'm quite interested in. So how do you measure change in complex social systems over time? How do you create a way of thinking about change that is able to approach the relational and the deep time ideas of Indigenous knowledges in a measurement framework? These are very interesting and exciting ideas, and it's something that we've been thinking about. And finally, I'll just say, Julie, one of the big projects that I've been involved with over the past 5 years or so, and we will continue on for the next decade or more, is creating data sets for Indigenous business in Australia in order to establish the descriptive overview of how Indigenous businesses not only look and where they are and how all of that, but how much impact they're having. And how do we frame impact? We're talking about not only giving back to the community and being able to tell those stories, but the revenue impact is huge, and it just starts to be able to get a little bit of a foothold in the mainstream economic discussion that brings Indigenous activity and Indigenous business leadership into the main ongoing concern of an economy of a nation like Australia. And it also is about employees. And last year we were able to show that even though it's kind of fledgling, it's super partial, that this data set is having a massive impact in real life for policy and for the community and for the businesses themselves. And that's the sort of work that we want to do. And that's work that is about impact. It is about weaving Indigenous ways of knowing and leading into a very mainstream, hard-teethed economic environment. So good morning to everyone from Australia.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you very much for bringing the kicking the door energy this morning at 6 a.m. I will pass it on to Stephen with the best office view today.
Kia ora koutou katoa, Julie, and just to echo my colleagues, thank you so much to you and to Charles and to the people who have joined us here. This is such an important topic. So yeah, I'm in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, which is Wellington, the capital of Aotearoa, New Zealand, just down the road from Jesse. I'm here at our offices, so it is a great view. So we have the Houses of Parliament behind us here, and that's the Beehive, which is a bit of an icon for good and for bad reasons. It's actually built on top of an old pa site, so a Maori village. We're at Pipitia Beach, where the river meets the sea, except the river doesn't flow down the mountain anymore because it's been concreted over. And the sea isn't here anymore because of landfill, and we've kind of expanded out the city. So, the first thing for me to say is just to acknowledge that we're here in a place where mana whenua, or people of the land, are not Pakeha like me. It's a very complex, interesting geographical and social landscape. Jesse mentioned one of the projects that we'd worked on. One of the interesting challenges about that is that we have probably 5 or 6 iwi or tribal groups who would see themselves as the people of this region in different ways. So, you have an Indigenous lens, but then within that, different Indigenous groups as well. And, it's not necessarily homogenous. And I think that raises all sorts of interesting challenges, but also possibilities for doing great research. Now, unlike my other three friends and co-colleagues, panelists here today, I'm not Indigenous. I'm Pakeha, so a person of New Zealand, Aotearoa, not of Maori heritage. My roots are primarily Irish, but also some other mix of European. And here in Aotearoa, I would probably describe myself as tangata Tiriti. So Jesse referred to the Tiriti of Waitangi, Treaty of Waitangi, which is the founding document of New Zealand, signed between the British Crown and local iwi, local Maori populations back in 1840. And as tangata Tiriti, what makes me part of this country is my adherence to that treaty. So I'm very proud to be here and to represent, I suppose, a non-Indigenous perspective on this panel. Many of you perhaps listening are not Indigenous also, but are keen to kind of explore what it means to be an ally and how we can work together to support this kaupapa or this work, this way of doing things. And yeah, I completely agree with what my colleagues have already said. I came to this work because my background is in critical management studies. And for a number of years, I was the chair of the critical management studies division at the Academy of Management. And it was really interesting and pleasing to me that during that time, more and more Indigenous research was being submitted to the critical management studies division at the Academy. I think it was an obvious and a good home for that, although there's more work to be done. But what I liked about what was happening was that critical management studies has always been about, questioning the way things are and thinking differently. And so it's just these two parts that Jesse spoke of. The first that need to be critical, that need to sort of, and again, this is Michelle's point, to break down and Anna Maria's too, break down those structures. But then I think importantly, sometimes for my colleagues in CMS, we don't realize that's just half of it. I mean, there's no point pulling things down unless something else sort of is built through that. And so I think while we did a lot of work on decolonization, I think what's really exciting for forums like this is to talk about re-indigenization. And how do we indigenize things? And I think we are really fortunate that we live in a time that many of our young people are interested in this. So when we go into the classroom, they're curious in a way that perhaps when Anna Maria and Michelle and I and Jesse started out, people maybe weren't so curious. So I think we have a real opportunity with many of our young people looking for different ways. And I think, that's the exciting part, as my co-panelists have said. The exciting part is, how can we do some interesting new stuff to actually pull through these different perspectives at a time when we really, really need different perspectives in terms of management, accounting, strategy, leadership, all the subfields. The main way that in the last couple of years I've been so fortunate to work with the people that you see here. I actually pulled the picture off my office door. Coming soon, Indigenous Management, Knowledges and Frameworks. So Anna Maria has very much led this project, and Jesse and I got involved, and Michelle and Julie are contributors, and there's probably other people as well here who are contributors. It's a great project. We've brought together, I think it's nearly 100 Indigenous and non-Indigenous scholars working on Indigenous management together in this book. And we're really excited that there'll be this resource that we can use and that we can share. So very excited to talk to people with the group here about how do we advance this? How do we take this opportunity and how do we move forward? And really, I think Jesse used the term, about how do we introduce this cool stuff, this really interesting, world-changing, existential, different ways of looking at things. And so I'm really grateful for Julie and Charles for giving us the opportunity, and grateful for people being here. And yeah, let's go, Julie. Let's do it. Let's talk about this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all taking the time to introduce yourself. I'm realizing that I didn't introduce myself. So I am Julie Bernard. I am currently on the endowment track. I am a professor of sustainable finance at University of Waterloo, and I think most of you in this call know me for my work on a 2IC and conservation impact bond. And this is all I'm going to say about myself because you're not here to hear about me. You're here to hear about all these wonderful panelists. And as Stephen mentioned, they are all involved in some ways, not similar to in the International Academy of Research in Indigenous Management and Organizational Studies. I invite you to look it up because there is an exciting conference happening in Melbourne in October this year. And I think the call for paper is still open, if I am not mistaken. Still accepting paper, and it's a wonderful conference to have attended some editions. So for today, I'm suggesting that we break this conversation into two main things, one being bridges and barriers. I think we've already started to talk about this, and then moving into practical pathways. So I think that we'll keep the discussion going on. I think we've heard some of the barriers, and I would be curious to hear a bit more about where do the panelists see the opportunity for integration? How do we waive Indigenous knowledge? And I will start reverse way, and I will let Stephen start off.
Wow. Okay. Sorry, I've just been in the chat box. Can I pass it on? Or can you
Yeah.
repeat the question, Julie? Sorry.
We can pass it on to Michelle if you want,
Yeah,
and I'll circle
cool.
back to
Thanks,
you at
man.
the end.
Okay.
Yeah, look, let me just say a few things and we can have a yarn. But so where do we start? From my perspective at the University of Melbourne, we have a direction from our strategy work that we've been doing as a university, not only our Indigenous strategy, Mermic-Jering, which is been endorsed by the university and really is a very comprehensive strategy that is directing all faculties to work towards Indigenising and weaving Indigenous knowledges into all curriculum, all courses. There is also a deadline for this at the University of Melbourne. So how do we go about doing this in a place where there will never be sufficient Indigenous academic leadership to work alongside every faculty member who wishes to be a part of Indigenising their curriculum? One of the ways that, as the Associate Dean Indigenous in the Faculty of Business and Economics and Melbourne Business School, that I have gone about doing this is about, first of all, thinking about the environment, the culture of the faculty and what is getting in the way. So one of the things to think about from my perspective is how receptive are heads of department and faculty members to the idea of working on Indigenising curriculum. When we have, because when we think about it from that kind of more structural position, I think it's very important. We've got promotion guidelines for academics that are about achieving publication outcomes in specific journals. We have specific journals asking only for American financial data sets to be used, especially around accounting and finance. So why, in this kind of more meta context, would individual academics, or could individual academics in the subjects that they teach, in the courses they coordinate, be open to Indigenising curriculum or finding spaces where they could challenge themselves? As Stephen said before, this is a challenge to the knowledge that has been established in their discipline. but also challenging their own self as in terms of their positionality and their training as an academic. So it's actually quite a difficult ask with a lot of power dynamics at play, with a lot of there's a lot at stake here. And we're not going into a space, and I'm really trying to pay attention here, Julie, to the culture and the receptivity for the work that is to be done. Because it is certainly my perspective that this is not the work for me to do as an Indigenous academic. It actually is work for the people who are expert in their discipline, who are teaching this discipline, to be open and to work alongside. So it is strength through collaboration, working alongside, and being ready. And we talk a lot about that here in Australia from a Wiradjuri perspective, Yaldalinga, to be ready to prepare that space. And that kind of preparation piece is really huge. So we've done cultural awareness training. We've done Indigenous research workshops in our faculty. We've done all sorts of different ways of kind of preparing the space, and also talking about the importance of doing this work. So again, it comes back to an invitation, in my sense, from established academics who are ready to do some work with them. And we've had some incredible work, specifically in the Department of Accounting at the University of Melbourne, of a group of accounting academics who have gone and established a long-term relationship with the local, the Victorian Aboriginal Chamber of Commerce called Kinaway, and started to develop a really bespoke teaching case that can be applied across a few different subjects in our Bachelor's of Commerce Accounting stream. So it takes time, it takes long-term relationships, because we are centering Indigenous values at that. So the weaving piece is has to be with purpose, has to be in collaboration, and it needs the time and the resources and the preparation in order to achieve it. So I'll just say those few words.
Thank you very much. I will pass it on to Anna. You are muted.
Thank you, Michelle. I echo very much what you're saying. In Canada, we just celebrate this week the National Indigenous Peoples Day. And it was just so wonderful to see so many young people going there. Young people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, Indigenous young people dancing with pride. So we are in a very special moment. In Canada, we have the Reconciliation Commission report 2015. So there is a very special moment happening in many places. I can see in Peru, I can see in many places. But one thing that, and I agree with you, research takes time and there is the tensions and all that. But one thing that we should not forget in all this is ceremony. So you asked, Julie, where do we see opportunities for integration? What challenges have you encountered? Bridges and barriers. And I would say in the bridge, let's think about ceremony. Ceremony is so important. Ceremony really is like it's our right relation with the land, a spiritual knowledge, and with each other. It's acknowledging that we are part of a bigger universe. And I see this is very important in every conversation. It's why in Arimos we start with the ceremony, because create this ethical conversation. Some of these conversations are difficult. Even in Canada with the reconciliations, they are difficult. Organizing the first Arimo was difficult. The staff sometimes say, what is going to happen here? People are concerned about the land now because there are land claims and so on. But one of the things that we just need to say sometimes is say, Okay, we are learning together here. This is good for non-Indigenous people. This is good for all of us. Okay. And I think that that's, to me, when we start getting together, it's very important to start in ceremony. Ceremony change the tone of the conversation and the room. Remind us that we need to be humble and listening. We just did the Arimos track in Manchester, and it went very well. Great papers and everything, but I felt that needed the ceremony, because the ceremony kind of invite us to be humble, right? And that was important. The other thing, talking about bridges, and I think important is the ceremony, is that weaving. What it means weaving. I think when we talk integration, I get nervous. I frankly get very, very nervous because for years and years, everywhere, every nation that I know, in every country, including Canada, indigenous people need to integrate. What it means integrate in this context, right? In this context, sometimes mean absorption. So weaving is a better word because retain the integrity of the both systems. We just need to think about that. So, and everywhere indigenous people say, we want to have our own way. We hear here in Canada, we hear in Peru, we hear in Ecuador, we hear in the United Nations. We want our own way. And so I think that that's what something we need to understand. Another problem with integration is that oftentimes, as Jesse was saying, some indigenous knowledge challenge Western knowledge. And we are seeing more and more. And this is why the alignment with critical management comes, because it's challenging ways of seeing the world. So I think we need to just be careful with that and say, what are the breaches here? And I think we have a tremendous opportunity to change things. I think, at least in Canada, is a very important moment right now. And the other thing I want to say is things are changing. Someone say, we remember 20 years ago, 25 years, I used to go to the Academy of Management. We were 5 people, 6 people. No one came to our session, so we just talk ourselves. Now we have number of special issues. If you think in the last 3 years, lots of special issues, book project. We have in Journal of Business Ethics a new section on indigeneity and ethics, right? So many of us will fall for making all this visible, and now we are there, right? So the landscape, as Michelle was saying, we see even in the newspapers, lots of more coverage about indigenous businesses, right? The question is now how we understand that, how we translate that. And I think there is a lot of a conversation about translation, how we as academics move in the two worlds in a way, being academic and being activists with working with indigenous community. So anyway, I will leave it just now here, but I would love to hear others. So thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting how Michelle talked about this need for leadership and how experts should indigenize, and how Anna Maria brought the waving and how you integrate and how you make sure that the integration is not erasing some very important components. So I think your two intervention are complementing each other really well. I will pass it on to Jesse.
Thanks, Julie. I think Michelle's point about the structural challenge and taking that leadership position, I think, is really interesting. And uh, that's a big challenge because if you don't have that structural piece, no matter how excited and motivated and passionate you are, things don't move quickly when there are lots of structural impediments in place. And I think we're in an okay place at our university currently in that space. Um, But I think with our current, we've got this kind of new coalition government that's kind of a case of like a tail wagging the dog. One of the smaller parties is um, really quite dominant and has, I think, a kind of outlier perspective on the place of Indigenous and Maori thinking in society. But it's made me a little bit nervous because I have felt for a long time that we have some kind of structural stability, however small it might be, around Indigenous and Maori place in New Zealand. Um, but but I'm starting to see that can actually be erased, like you say, Julie, that it kind of the potential for erasure. So it's kind of tiring, you have to be sort of ever vigilant. And yeah, that's really exhausting and that's a big challenge. The thing I think is really positive, and so I'm taking your term, Steve, of re-indigenizing and making that my second thing. So if my first thing is about equity, then I think without equity we really struggle. But the second thing is that idea of re-indigenizing. So a lot of Kiwis go overseas and they wear pounamu, greenstone necklaces, and suddenly they realize, hey, what's really cool about Aotearoa? There are lots of cool things, but one of the really cool things is the Maori culture, and it's that kind of and then they come back and don't necessarily do anything else to support that. But that idea of re-indigenizing, I think, is so important here. And Anna Maria talks about ritual, and it's in those rituals, in those cultural practices that the really profound things sit. And we found at the Aeramos conference, we sat in a circle and we followed um, these local protocols of introducing ourselves, of really being present as people, and it was really profound. And I saw a lot of connections between the way we did that and the way that we do things in Maori culture. Um, but I think also for some of the non-Indigenous attendees, it was like the first time that they'd been able to bring their whole selves into a space. And um, it got a little bit crazy sometimes, people were sharing stuff about, um, their kind of personal life struggles and all sorts of things that they've been going through. But I think it was this moment where they were like, wow, I can be here. I can really show up here. And so that the thing that I think, building on that idea of cultural practices is the narratives, the cool stuff that people are doing, because it's those things are in some ways separate from the structural impediments within the university, within the academy. Those people don't care about what's happening in the university or the academy. They're just out there doing cool things. They're building awesome businesses. They're doing amazing social impact at the same time as they have environmental impact and build these economic powerhouses. Um, and and those narratives to me give us a bit of ongoing, underlying influence and strength that is separate from some of these structural and political impediments that kind of come and go.
Yeah, can I just add? I mean, I think I agree with what everyone said. And one of the things similar to what Anna Maria is talking about and what Jesse's and Michelle have talked about as well is that last weekend we had I think it's only the second or the third time it's happened. We have a new public holiday in Aotearoa, which is called Matariki, which is the Maori New Year. Which obviously, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it makes much more sense to have your New Year's celebration at the winter solstice, as it was, for this place. And I think what is really encouraging is how gradually more and more people in this country are beginning to celebrate the ceremonies, celebrate the protocols, celebrate the stories, celebrate the myths of our indigenous culture or cultures. here, not because people feel guilty, not because people feel that they should, but because it just seems like a really great thing to do. Anna Maria said, people are starting to realize that this is good for all of us who live here and want to be more connected to this place, have an opportunity now, to embrace these protocols and these stories that maybe in a way we didn't in the past. Now, that's not to sort of pretend that the political problems don't exist, because as Jesse said, the political environment here in New Zealand is nowhere near as progressive as what it was just a couple of years ago. And that's a challenge. But, I think when I look at not everyone, but most of our young people, and I have kids who are kind of at university now, they are looking for new ways of doing things. Capitalism as it's currently constructed, I mean, my 19 and 22-year-old realize that isn't working out for them. They're not going to be able to afford to buy a house in this city. They're not going to be able to, to see their life necessarily be materially more beneficial than that of their parents. And that helps them realize that there's always been a large group of people, often, overrepresented by Indigenous people, for whom that's never been possible anyway. So I think we are at a moment where people are looking for alternative things to do. And so I think we almost need to approach this maybe two ways. One, when we're in the classroom, if we can introduce the stories that Anna Maria mentioned that are emerging in the media of these new ways of doing business, new Indigenous or partnership companies, Indigenous and allies working together on new ways of doing things, I think there's an appetite in the classroom for that. But as Michelle says, some of the things we need to change to really re-indigenize, which isn't my word, by the way, but I love that word and I'm borrowing it and I'm totally using it, Jesse. Um, some of the structures run really deep. At the Ayaramas conference, I think was it 2 years ago or a year ago, we had the keynote to start with by Leroy Little Bear, who many of you in Canada will be familiar with. And Leroy gave this amazing talk about how an Indigenous way of doing things is all about relationships, the relationships between things, whereas sometimes a Eurocentric way is about the pieces, the atoms or the objects on their own. And I think about the earliest discussions I had with my PhD supervisors, were all about, well, what is your unit of analysis? And that most fundamental research question that we ask, you need to isolate your unit of analysis. It goes against the ways of so many different Indigenous cultures, which are about what is the point of isolating your unit of analysis, because that's not how the world works. The world is about relationships between things. It's not just about things in isolation. So there's some fundamental structures that while we're introducing those cool stories in the classroom, I think at the same time, we need to kind of really be looking at the structures and how we challenge those in ways which are going to be really concerning for many of our colleagues. Anna Maria mentioned all the great new opportunities to publish on Indigenous management. That's true, but it is still very, very difficult to get material published from Indigenous perspectives. So that's an ongoing struggle at the research end. At the teaching end, I think we have some an audience who's receptive, but I'm not sure at the research end that a large majority of our colleagues are completely comfortable with where this might take them. So Anna Maria might have some thoughts on that.
Well, what I want to say is that, just respond to Jesse about the circle and how we come in a circle and how for some people it's difficult to come to themselves as a human being. Who are you? Right? Tell us who you are, not just your titles, but who are you as a person? Where you come from? What are your intentions? And that's hard. And this is why in meetings, and I hope universities start, and I see some universities start bringing executives and residents, elders executive in residence, because this is so important. They're the role of the elders to come. And that's what we did in Arimas. An elder was around, 5 elders around, and someone came with with the eagle feathers and to support that person. And so that's very important. Now I want to talk about this structural issue. I was director of a research center doing community-based economies some years ago. And structure they are important to build the structures to read, but we just have to be careful because, to tell you the truth, we are all in colonial universities. That's the truth. We are in colonial structures. And so how we work our way, can we, I think it's important that things are advancing in that way, but also I wanted to say to many of the people I see, Michelle, Joel, and Katrina and all that, I want to say that structures are important, but we also have agency. Each of us have agency to do things in our classrooms, in our research, in our relationship with communities, in our community engagement. We have the responsibility and the ability. Whatever structures you are in your own home universities, you have the agency to make changes every day. And you can make those changes in many different ways. I start with the stories in my classroom. The stories are powerful. Think about how Indigenous people learn and transmit knowledge. And it is about observing and observing all the relations, observing the Guamanis, the Quechua mountains, observing the raven, observing the condor, and learning from all these relationships. That brings a totally different worldview, learning from it. And then the rituals and the stories and the songs. So I think we all can bring that. And that's what is the book about. The book that we have just edited have more than 80 contributors. And we say, just write a little bit, 2, 3 pages, 4 maximum stories on. We accept different formats. And what we aspire with that was that they are like I call bocaditos in Spanish, a little appetizers to open the appetite for the young people to learn more. And there are resources there, videos and so on that they can go on. But in the classroom, that's what we need to do, is to bring those appetizers. And one thing that I always remember is stories bring our common humanity. The stories of encounter with your own stories in working with Indigenous communities and what you learn and what was passed on to you. I think that's what the students remember. They remember stories because that brings our common humanity, right? So that's what I wanted to say. And then people are looking for alternatives. I think before, like in the 90s, early 2000, if you were in a business schools and you talk something, you criticize economic globalization, people were scared and annoyed. Now the young people are open. And because I think we know that this is a system that is not working and people are looking for alternatives. We have a tremendous social crisis, inequality everywhere. We have ecological crisis. And now we are looking for different models. We're looking for different ways of being. And that's where Indigenous knowledges can help us to see a different way. And there are concepts of buen vivir. There is the concept of two-eye seeing that can open our mind to see other ways that we can be in this world, that there are other alternatives in which we can walk together and hopefully don't keep destroying ourselves.
Thank you very much. I am conscious of time, and I know probably a lot of people in the audience have questions. So I'm suggesting that we're opening up the Q&A because I'm assuming that for the morning people, you have kids to drop off and people to teach, and people here might have kids to pick up and dinner to serve. Who wants to break the ice for the Q&A? No one? Going once, going twice. I'll ask a question to break the ice. So, as some of you know, I'm working on a 2I seeing conservation impact bond. And the premise of this is, of course, to weave the two knowledge system. And we've been facing various struggle at the structural level of the university, mainly because I think Canadian universities are not really used to doing things differently. So I think this echoes what you were saying. So I know that Australia and Canada and New Zealand are all doing things very differently. All colonial state with different governments, with different of progress going forward and very often going backwards. But I would be curious then in your research or in your practice, how what are your tips and advice for weaving knowledge system in a colonial setting like the university, knowing that there are so many structures and barriers to bringing new form of knowledges, including Indigenous knowledges? It's not an easy question, but let's give it a try.
I always say research with Indigenous people is for Indigenous people. We need to remember it's for Indigenous people. They have to, and it takes time. Relationship building takes time. And there is this concern, especially for young scholars and tenure, that how they manage to build the relationship well versus this tension to have to go for tenure and have to produce and have to have an articles. So there is this kind of tensions that we just need to be aware of, and certainly they have been in the last years lots of discussions because some of us were working with community-based for so many years and asking, for example, the Tri-Council in Canada to recognize uh, uh, community-based and community-based research and to recognize our communities as a partners and give salaries and so on and be beneficial to some of this research. However, I think that we need to recognize the time and we need to recognize that also when we engage with Indigenous communities, we build relationships, there is also a moment of the translation, how we translate that into journals. And hopefully now the journals are more open. I think we are living in a very special moment. It's why I say I think the journals are open now to publish uh, Indigenous issues. I think that still we need to develop the reviewers because still we get some reviewers that don't understand. And some of us, including me, I'm dealing with that, right? You sometimes have to build with this Western view of this is the way to do it. And then, how you publish ethnography. And sometimes people say you have to use the Jugoya network and framework and so on. So there is these things that we have to work with still. And this is why in Arimos we have these conversations. It's why in Arimos we say, okay, how you're dealing with that, how we can weave it in a way that it can be translated in a way that respect Indigenous people, but at the same time, you can reach your audience, right? So that's important. The other thing I see is that sometimes people is rushing to publish because in our field it's about models and arrows and so on. And I would say, no, don't do that. Please don't do that. Don't try to just use Indigenous model to fill boxes. That doesn't work. And so we have to be very, very mindful of this. In a way, I always feel some of the issues that we have faced for some years with community-based research are now reflected in Indigenous research as well. So, but I am very positive that things are changing. As an editor, I'm always welcome different ways of singing. I think that, we are just moving forward. Anyway, I will leave it there for now to hear what others have to say.
Thank you. I think we lost Jesse. I hope everything is okay and it's a
Probably
minor.
good to say that Jesse has just had, well, not him personally, but his wife has just had a little baby boy. So Kahu is only 4 weeks old. So if Jesse dips out, then I think that's probably for a good reason.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, in the meantime, he's just sent me a message. But anyway, in the meantime, just to add to what Anna Maria has said, yeah, I think the two-eye seeing model is a good one. And here in Aotearoa, we have this notion of the braided rivers, Te Awahira. And I think the great thing about both of those models, and it comes back to a point that was made about integration, is that no one should trade two eyes for one eye. To make a braided river into one is going to, it leads to environmental problems. There's a reason why things are braided as a river in our geography here, and there's a reason why two eyes seeing is good. Integration means that there has to be a winner. And I think, generally speaking, the winner is not Indigenous people. So I think keeping alive this notion of these two ways of seeing, two ways of doing things or more is really important. And I think what that means for our young scholars is that we have to help them publish in the traditional ways because they need employment. They need to operate in this world. But we also need to help them, if we can, to work with Indigenous communities, work with their own communities or other Indigenous communities. So I think, I've been going to the Academy of Management for so many years, where it's not just Indigenous young scholars, but all young scholars suffer from the older people who say, "Don't worry about publishing." I wish I hadn't worried about publishing, which is so not true. You have to, there's a performative culture that I think we can help people with to take their interesting subject matter, but do it in ways that fits the academy. But also that second river, that second way of seeing is so important. So we do also need to support people in those respects. And I think one or the other is not useful. It's when we bring the two together so that both of those streams can exist that can really help our young researchers and young scholars. As Anna Maria says, it's a challenge and it's a burden for a lot of our young Indigenous scholars because they're being asked to do so much more than just publish. There's all this cultural capital that increasingly, we're asking them to bring to our institutions, whether it's through welcomes. Anna Maria's talked about the importance of ceremony, which is so true. It changes everything. But who's that burden falling on? Often that burden for creating and delivering and offering welcomes, ceremonies, acknowledgements of country. We're relying on our young scholars to do that. So we really need, if we're going to grow this, and it will take time, all of us need to support young Indigenous scholars and also non-Indigenous scholars to work with Indigenous communities. So I think that's something that people should be mindful of. It won't be quick. We are making progress, but we really need to shelter and protect and help nurture our young scholars in this process.
Okay, thank you very, very much all for your insight. I am conscious of time and realizing this was a very ambitious discussion for the time frame that we had. But as we discussed, the panelists have dropped in the chat a lot of resources. I know that Stephen has been very active in making sure that you have all of the links. I've known that Michelle also shared some of it. And I think that this type of discussion on waiving knowledge system will definitely be happening at the end of October. So if you feel like you're doing research around Indigenous peoples, I think that Arimos is a great conference for you to go to where you'll sit in circles. Some people might share some funny stuff or some deep personal stuff, but it's a great conference to attend. There's also the book coming out. I think there was also a website for accounting resources. So thank you all so much for your patience. I know we've been going a little bit over the time, but thank you so much for the panelists for being here very early in the morning or early in the afternoon. Thank you very, very much. And I will let Charles close this meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you for attending. Thank you for your insights on this quite relevant, somewhat sensitive, obviously. Thank you, Julie, for the coordination. And for Content for Impact, we don't have a set date yet, but we plan to have one or maybe even two events before the end of the year. We try to keep it at 3 or 4 years. So this is our second we have in 2025. So you will hear from us, but exactly what we heard, this is what we're looking for kind of impact. Definitely a lot of impact work going on from the indigenous perspective in business school in general, in education. So yeah, stay put and we will hear from you. But once again, thank you for the panelists and the audience for attending. Well, bye-bye.
Well, thank you to you
Thank you,
all, and
Charles.
Thank
you all for
you.
Thanks,
attending.
everyone.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for having us.
Thank you.
Oh, Jesse, there you
Thanks,
are back.
everyone. Take
Great.
care.
Good. Good. Thank you, Julie. Just
Julie.
Anna
Yeah,
Maria,
thanks,
you're
Julie.
there.
Yes.
Good.
Okay.
Maybe
Thank you,
we
everyone.